All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samuel?
Well, it is Wednesday, so we've got Memory of Light. And we're going to go through that. We got some Egwene chapters. We got some Matt, and we've got some battle at Sheo Ghul. Fail makes appearance again, which I think he did an okay with her job with
Hmm.
her.
Hmm.
Although we get a dumb moment in that whole situation here coming up, not in today's episode, but
Yeah,
where
remind me. I have a thought on demand rid that was kind of worming around in my brain, and it didn't actually pop forward until right before we started recording, and I said, "Huh." So
is there a
I've got a
specific
bit of a
part you want me to
rant.
bring it up?
Well, it's in the first couple of chapters. We're starting on chapter 31, and 31 and 32 have some Matt sections, and he brings up Demandred's ranting and raving. Actually, let's just start it off here. Let me just come off the top rope with it because it is more of a meta point than a specific point. Um, and it just kind of dawned on me that never really hit me right. And it just kind of suddenly dawned on me why is we don't really have a setup for this. That Demandred has kind of lost his mind. Now
Mm.
we know from his history that Demandred's key flaw, if you will, is pride and jealousy. That he was always number two and he resented it because
Hmm.
Lews Therin was always number one and and Demandred was always the runner up in everything they did. Um and and uh but it every time we've seen him, that 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 hatred of Lews Therin has always come across as cold. You know, revenge is a dish best served cold, fits Demandred.
Hmm.
And we even have it with Sanderson's writing because we have moments of Demandred in the previous two books before he shows up here out of nowhere with the Sharans, but the way he acts during the last battle, there's no real setup for it.
I
The
wonder
I
if I wonder if it's supposed to be in line with the Sharans in the fact that that's part of his character. The part he's playing, Bow the
yeah.
Wild, you know, and that's
Hmm.
actually part of the presentation he put for the Sharans was there was this revenge arc that he needed to bring them to. That's why
Hmm.
we're taking our army from
Hmm.
Shara to this strange place.
And that is where uh the lack of setup doesn't give us a good payoff is we know almost nothing about the Sharan culture, and in all of the Demandred scenes we've seen, we we don't get a clue that this is coming. We don't see him start to go from that cold, methodical, calculating general to this raving madman, right? It, it makes sense that he's face me, Lews Therin. You know, we're going to settle this one on one, you and me, as it always should have been. But where does this come from? This seems out of character. That and I think the part of the reason for it is there has to be because Demandred is so powerful, and we got a glimpse of this in Crown of Swords when Samael shows up and the Ashaman just get blasted
Hmm.
and are like and have to immediately retreat when Samael shows up during the early fighting of the on the border there with Ilian and Tyr, and Samael shows up and the Ashaman just have to bail because he's so powerful. Well, so you need a reason that Demandred isn't up there on the front lines just blasting massive holes in the enemy army, opposing channelers or not. And so the reason is that he's sitting back there. He doesn't want to leave himself open for Lews Therin to suddenly jump in and get him.
Hmm.
And there also seems to be an element of actually no, he's bought into this idea of Bow the Wild versus the Dragon. This has to be a one-on-one, mano a mano showdown. but there's just no setup for it.
Yeah, it's almost like and this is something I was thinking reading these chapters because we do see Matt as the general now, bringing everything together. We lost something in a very kind of meh death of a Forsaken earlier, and this is under Jordan's watch, is the October surprise actually could have been Samael coming back
Mm,
because he was the best general of the Forsaken. And Matt against Samael as the
mm.
plot line versus Demandra just being this random army leader that is in there because Lews Therin wasn't the best general during that time. Demandred was worse than him. You know, without the Greandal surprise of the great captains losing their minds, they would be beating Demandred.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
the October surprise could have been, aha, Samael did not die in Shale Ghul. And that actually would have been made more sense of a little surprise of coming out of nowhere because he could have been faking his death to come out and, you know, I can't fight you mano y mano, Lews Therin, but I can lead an army.
The cats are trying to murder each other. Okay. And it also th that the October surprise reference there being right before the election, so before the last battle starts, you could have had that October surprise, and that could have been the tease, the lead up to, because Demandred, you're too obsessed with Lews Therin, you can't lead the army. You're too
Mm-hmm.
obsessed. It's too personal for you. We need, in much the same way that Elaine is the leader, but she's not the general,
Mm-hmm.
right? So yeah, that anyway. Uh,
Well, not only that, it almost would have been nice to have Rand kill Demandred on his way to Moradin. It could have been it. This is where a quick death of an important character would have been okay because it would have been like, haha, I'm gonna finally beat you this time. Mm, no, you didn't. Sorry. You came in second again.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we would have all gone, wah, wah. Sorry,
Wah, wah.
Demandred.
Well,
Yeah.
there is something later we in a Galad chapter. It kind of made me annoyed thinking ahead. Um, but this actually segues into one of the comments here because I'll start with this one because we're kind of jaded and nitpicky, and now it's not this bad, but I think I've used as an analogy before Game of Thrones that that last season was so bad. But even before then, I mean, I was one of these people, and I know there are a lot out there that are like, guys, it started to go downhill a couple seasons before that. Um, but it's not that bad. But knowing how it ends, I have no desire to rewatch, even though those first several seasons were so good. But I have no desire to rewatch it because I know how it ends. And I
Mm-hmm.
was very dissatisfied with the end. Mass Effect is another example. Because of the relatively new re-release, a friend of my son's got it for him for his birthday, and I was like, man, I kind of want to replay that now because it's been a while. But and I reinstalled it, and then I was like, do I really want to though? Because the first two games are so good, but then it wasn't just the ending. From the very beginning of Mass Effect 3, I was like, this feels off. This isn't right. And come to find out, the head writer was gone. It was a totally new team, basically. And so that's why from the beginning it just felt off. And so we do get a bit jaded and a bit nitpicky. And unfortunately, I uh, uh understandably and justifiably, I feel a lot of the times, but Ideals makes points out that we miss a good moment because of it, which is so he says, "Damn guys, for me, the Black Tower stands with the Lion of Andor was such a great moment. It made me cheer out loud. I was waiting for you to react to it, and even though I agree with your criticism of Andor's speech, it's such a great moment. Come on." I'm just excited every time we see Logain. I read somewhere that Logain is a great character in a story that is not about him. It made me laugh out loud. What is Rand's story, but simultaneously is a big setup for Logain's story that shall happen after and span as many books, which could have been, one of the things that came into you know, the idea of subsequent novels that was kind of floating around in Jordan's head, and
Mhm.
that would have been awesome. And he makes a great point, and you responded that you've hit a bias we've developed, and you are correct. I think we're so jaded by some of the internal thoughts that we both missed that. It was a great moment for Logain, especially since he's Geldan and Geldian, whatever. I think, and has no natural allegiance to Andor. In fact, they're pretty. Uh, well, the Mirandians are worse, but they are a
Mhm.
bit of competitors. And so the fact that he is this minor noble from a foreign place, he's set up in the Black Tower. The Black Tower is kind of the natural opposition to the White Tower, and Elaine is not only Queen of Andor, but she is a high-ranking Aes Sedai. And for him to say that, you know, that is a great moment. It is just a damn shame it kind of gets lost in the noise. But I'm glad that someone, reading it for the first time gets to it and says, yes, because it is a stand up and cheer kind of moment. That is a kudos to Sanderson's writing, and it's shame on us for not pulling that out of the parts that we were criticizing and focusing too much on the negative.
Mhm.
Um uh oh, you getting the reference there? Okay, what's the
Wait.
reference guide for?
Oh, because I couldn't remember which one was the Mayaner general and which one was the Geldane general. Because I was like, we actually could have had a moment there with Logan, because they would have
Oh
history.
yeah.
Because Logan just a few years ago was
Oh
fighting this
yeah.
army.
Oh, that's a good point. No, it was the Miner is the one that gets killed off screen, and that was another little
So
nice
Arganda is
quiet
the
moment.
the Gelden guy, and he's
Yeah,
still
yeah.
alive, and he's actually there in that moment.
Actually, that's a good point because you could have enhanced that moment by having a scene that mirrored Bashir and Taim when Taim shows up to
Hmm.
the palace in Camelin. You could have had a moment that kind of mirrored that, but was with a legitimate good guy. Even though there's going to be tension there, even though they fought each other, and at one time were enemies, you could have had that uneasy tension, but then had a nice moment there, rather than uh, having the focus too much on Androl.
Yeah, because Elaine says something about not being able to heal Arganda properly. Yeah, he's the
Yeah,
Gelden first captain. Yep.
yeah,
Uh, so not being able to heal him properly, he'll probably never hold a sword. And Logain picking him up and getting one of the Ashaman to heal him, or something like that.
yeah, yeah. That would have been something that would have been pretty cool. Um, I only watched some YouTube clips of the adaptation and it made me vomit. I feel like that when I watch like Drinker or Nerdrotic or those guys talk about some of the Marvel uh shows or Rings of Power, these other things. I have no intention of watching, but I get this great cathartic release from them ripping apart the awfulness. Um
Yeah, I hate outsourcing my opinions on things, but I also have limited time. Be full-time school, full-time work. This actually takes at least 6 hours of film time, even
mhm,
though it's like hour and a half episodes. But also research time. Plus, I have a family, and
yeah.
yard work and all that stuff. So it is good for the things that I'm kind of like, yeah, maybe I'll watch it, maybe I won't. Which is the Marvel ones are a good example of that, like She-Hulk and everything. But the ones that we've really, even though they've really trashed them, but we want to talk about, I still take the time to gut through it, and I try to have
Yeah.
my own opinion on them versus somebody else's. Yeah.
Um I only liked that one scene where Rosamund Pike removes some of the shadow logo filth from Matt's mouth into her own. She is good, but she's too tall, damn. Also, the first thing that came into my mind with that adaptation before I saw any of it was that in this cultural climate, ain't no way they are doing right by Aiel. Because they are basically the white power Scandinavian Giga Chads, which can't be allowed. Even though they're heavily inspired by um, the the tribes of Judah, the Jews, the most oppressed group in history, and Native Americans.
Hmm.
I'm
Native
drawing a
Native Americans, the Zulu, and the Jewish
there
descent.
was there was a tribe on the Texas coast, and I can't remember their name, but they were infamous, and I think they all got wiped out from disease and warfare. But the stories about them were that, and I can't believe I didn't think of this before when the Aiel first showed up, but I wish I could remember them because we learned about them in elementary school in Texas history. Is they were all purported to basically be giants because you're talking about an era when even European men who had more access, easier access to food in the era of colonization than native tribes. Even European men were like 5.5 feet tall, and these guys were all purportedly the men were all 6 to 7 feet tall. And there's some archaeological evidence to support that. But then there were also these insane stories about them of like of uh, someone writing a witnessing one of them running at full speed at someone. The opponent chucks a spear, it goes right through the guy's gut, and he keeps running until he kills the guy who threw the spear at him. So it made me wonder how much that particular tribe may have been inspired by Eel because they're all huge and they were all fearsome warriors.
Hmm.
Um, there's also, you can see a bit of Comanche and Apache in the way in their ambush tactics and in their
Well,
stealth and all that
weren't
in
the
them as well.
Karankawa, the ones that lived in the Texas coastal region, weren't they like 7 foot tall? Yeah.
That's who I'm trying to think of.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, I saw. Just put the name to the
Yeah.
story. Yeah.
Yeah. I remembered the story, but I couldn't remember the tribe name. Um, uh, back to Ideal's point. And of course, they casted a stocky, dreadlock wearing, homely black chick to play Aviendha. Well, home, she's okay looking, but no, she is this ethnically ambiguous, like half African or half something or other, ethnically ambiguous, to pair with big dummy there.
Which is funny
Um,
because we're talking about again cultures and regions and homogeneity, and they've been in the Waste isolated from everybody else for forever. But what we got was who they cast for Avienda, then this big giant Giga Chat ass lady who is a big Nordic woman, and then the other person. So
oh,
they're
Bane and Shiad, yeah, we're both. Well, they both looked more the part, but one of them was huge.
mhm.
Uh, and yeah,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
she,
this would have been a place to have the lady who played Brienne from Game of Thrones.
Mhm.
Big, strong, tall woman that you can that is believable that she can fight. That's why
have
it worked in Game of Thrones
have
because
her
you're
breed
like,
Melindra.
yeah,
Pair her up with Matt. Yeah.
no,
Um,
we can't be that evil. Come on.
my theory is that the guy in charge of the show, I think it's a chick actually, wants to ruin it. Oh no, it is
Hmm.
the dude
That's
from
it.
Survivor. Yeah,
Yep.
that is a dude.
Hmm.
Wants to ruin it intentionally, make a Black Mermaid before the canonical one was ever made. WoT is a very Western tale, a very powerful hero journey, the balancing of morality and doing what has to be done. Of course, it has to be subverted. The West is currently stuck in the state of Rand recounting to himself ad nauseum the names of people who died because of him, and they intend to keep us in it until we go mad and self-destruct or become too weak to resist because we're no better than our enemies. What's the point? Let it burn. I actually watched Sanderson rip the season 2 ending, and I hadn't seen that. I might need to find
Yeah,
that,
and I said in the comment I was going to watch it, and I got bogged down with stuff, so I'll have to watch it before the
and it
next
made me
one.
realize that as much as I hate his misses in the last 3 books, he did it the best he could. He is one of us. He gets it. It was an imperfect situation. I I agree. I think I can agree with the first half of that. He is one of us, but I don't know that he gets it, or he doesn't get enough of it. Maybe let's say he gets about 80% of it, because there's a moment here in the Matt stuff where I go, that's it. That's what I've been ranting about, where you don't get it. How do you not get it?
Well,
Um,
and there's also the part we talked about, we kind of uncovered intellectually that there was a lot for Tor to gain by him being the author.
yeah,
So he may get it, but he might not have had the talent that was
yeah. I
required
didn't
to.
realize how new he was when he got the job of writing this, and we looked that up previously of looking up the timeline of it, and I was like, holy crap! It was only a few years after his first publications with Tor, and it made me go down the rabbit hole of how much of this was Jordan and how much of this was Tor saying, no, this guy would be good, and
Mhm.
we can elevate one of our up and coming
Yep.
to
And every one of
top
his books
status.
that we have for publication, which was like, what is it, 15 or something we looked up? It was a high number of books are going to increase in sales by at least 100% because
Yeah.
he's the guy who followed Jordan. So
Hmm.
yeah, there
Hmm.
might have been business decisions made that day.
Um, your response of I agree that the effing great analogy of Rand in the West of Rand at that point of nihilism, which is where we are. We can further that with Steel Rand being the DEI overcorrection. And yeah, we need to look up that Sanderson thing. Another thing that I've been meaning to look up and ideals. I don't know if you uh, watch Shadversity or have heard this, but he said this as an aside, and I don't watch his stuff. My son does, but I watch him when he's on Friday Night Tights with Nerdrotic. And a couple weeks ago, he said something as an aside that I said, "Wait, what? That's big if true." Which is that supposedly the justification from the creators of the show for all the differences is that this is a different turning of the wheel. So basically they're admitting we're not actually adapting the books. We're
Hmm.
doing our own thing, and this is a different turning of the wheel. And that's how they justify all the differences. Which then again, something we've complained about, and we're not the only ones, ad nauseum of the why do why do you adapt Tolkien's appendices if you're going to just butcher the lore?
Hmm.
Why just do your own damn thing?
Hmm.
Because they want the IP because it's
I
easy
mean,
money.
they turned the wheel twice because we have a different Matt. I liked the original guy.
Yeah.
And it's actually in the scene that he said he liked, the pulling, because he actually did a good job of feeling like he was in agony and in distress in that moment, and his soul was being sucked from his body, even though it was the evil soul trying to take him. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I liked the original Matt, and this new guy just doesn't have me sold. And this is not the same as we talked about with Spartacus, where the new guy was actually kind of good, but
It's
he
just the
wasn't the
other.
old
Yeah.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one was kind of unfair to Liam, whatever his name is. But the new Matt, I think is kind of just not right. I don't know.
He just kind of exists.
Yeah.
Which
I
which is
mean, in
saying
an annoying way. I mean,
which is saying something because one of the only things we praised about that second season were those Matt Min scenes.
you praise. I didn't like him.
You didn't like them?
No, no. I've said it
I,
on air.
I thought you thought they were okay.
No,
I
my
know you.
opinion about them was the same as the opinion about Matt and Min in these scenes in the book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's just not right. It's not
See,
right.
I was looking at them in a vacuum, and it was after the fact that where you made the point of that you thought they were splitting up Rand's girls,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Instead
I
of
was like,
Rand
oh,
having the
geez,
three
yeah,
girls, it's the tripod of men having the tripod of women.
yeah,
Because we have Rand and Elaine, then we have Matt and
and
Min.
Min, and then Perrin is now with Aviendha.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I'll be interested to see what they do in season three, and it's the interest of, well, I just as I'm reading the comments here over on the side, one of the recommendations is from episode 296, and it's you use the meme of the guy in the news first time of Matt. I was like, yep, first time. That's how I'm gonna. That's how interested I am. Um, so yeah, this comment I find I think kind of hits the nail on the head of because Sanderson is a younger guy. I mean, he's kind of our age. of this analogy makes a lot of sense. Sanderson tries his hardest to make everything about Matt not serious, but reading it 10 years after it was written, I can't think of anything but a self insert by some perpetually sarcastic Redditor. The Marvel humor. To be serious about something, you have to commit. Committal means risking failure, and a Redditor can't afford to fail because he is a coward. Matt is not a coward. That's why Matt succeeds and Redditor doesn't. Yeah,
Why
it's
can't I expand that comment? I want you. You were reading more than I have. So okay, well,
um it's that great scene from Good Will Hunting of, basically the scene that won Robin Williams the Oscar of, you don't know what it's like to lose because you've never really loved because you've never really lived,
mhm.
right? And it's
Well,
it's
this
it's
this this is kind of a teaser for Friday or for Saturdays, Friday or Saturday, whenever we have time to do it. Social episode. I brought up something last night because of my class last night, which my social psychology, which we all know I love that class. Yay. Where there was 18 women and 3 guys in the class, and I got to hear a round table of women talking about how manhood is stupid. And this is the thing. The Redditor can't fail, and this everybody's heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where the less you actually know about something, the more you think you know about it, kind of thing. Very shortly put. But also, I did some follow-up research because that was my follow-up research uh, week. That actually, not only do you think you know more than you do, but you're more confident about what you think you know, and you tend to have
mm-hmm.
more zeal about that. That's what I saw. I saw a bunch of women talking about manhood, and I'm like, this is Dunning-Kruger because you have no idea what you're talking about. And actually, the thing I wanted to scream in this class, I was very tactful. I'm always very tactful, even though I have stuck to my integrity. I wanted to scream the fact that you can talk down on manhood is actually a testament of your first world problems because you don't see everything masculinity does for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're not out there working in the lines. You're not out there, fixing the city plumbing. You're not out there building houses. You're not at war. I mean, I was the second strength coach for the second lead strength coach for airstrike operations here out of Ellington. There were times where I would not have an updated roll call when they came back from deployment. That's awkward. And
Mm-hmm.
you call a name that is not there, and everybody puts their head down, and you just keep going because that person didn't come back. You don't see that. If you don't see that, then you have the definition of first world problems.
Yeah.
And your analysis of masculinity and manhood is so far off because you don't even know, but you're so confident in it. Sorry, that we'll go into detail on that. I don't want to get to ranting on this,
Yeah.
but we actually get that here where Egwene has a good moment for it. Egwene has a good moment, and I want to spend more time with that than a lot of the other moments in in this
Mm-hmm.
sequence here.
All right,
But
last comment. Very funny point about Jaws fighting separately. It makes no sense. Why the hell are they separate? The the logic hill, the diplomacy hill, ruffle. Emerillin, the shards portaled right behind the yellow and brown Najah hills, startling both. But thankfully, the enemy failed to observe the desired effect of such tactics due to the respective colors of our sisters' battle garb. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
yeah. I actually there's a line here that just kind of perfectly encapsulates where I was trying to figure out, what is it, kind of technically speaking about the way Sanderson writes versus the way Jordan wrote. Um, and there's a
Well, it's
scene.
it's my first comment on one of these. I said Sando
Yep,
keeps writing this like a bad D&D tabletop game.
exactly. So my first
Mm.
comment, we're starting on chapter 31, which is 533 in my book, and my first comment is page 536. Um, so there's a couple of it starts off with Egwene's sections, and there are two. There's a break where there's a break in time, and we do see that it was Uno leading that contingent of cavalry that got wiped out. And then I'd forgotten this part where he and the handful of others, that the handful that actually managed to get out of there, are swimming across the river, and Egwene meets him, and it's, speaking of redditors, the way he writes Uno is like, some redditor fanfic. It
Hmm.
was not great, but the specific moment for me is on page 536. It's into the second section here, when Egwene goes back to the front and is fighting, and there's this line here where it says, "What seemed like hours went by. Eventually, exhausted, she allowed Gawain to talk her into pulling back for a time." And I was like, there it is. So it's it's DM exposition. It's not expert cinematography.
Hmm.
Jordan wouldn't just tell us, you know, hours went by, what seemed like hours went by. He would find a poetic way to make you feel that. It's the difference. It's like, the difference between a good director or cinematographer, that the Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, the walking to, uh the walking out of Rivendell, and you get those, you know expansive shots, and you get the sense of great distance traveled and time passing. They don't just flash up on the screen sometime later.
Yeah.
No,
Oh,
they
it's like the scene in the show, and 3 months later with Matt and Rand when they
mm,
were making their way to
yeah, I forgot about that one.
yeah, and
Jeez, yeah,
three
thanks for
months
reminding me.
later. Yeah.
That's I mean, even a movie that's not a masterpiece of cinema like Fellowship, Rocky 4. Rocky 4 does a better job of this in the training montages, where you get that time is passing, that, he goes from clean shaven to stubble to a big beard, you
Hey,
know.
quit knocking 80s training montages. Those are my favorite.
I love those. Those are
I'm
great.
I'm making
Yeah.
a playlist. I make playlists for the gym, and I got 80s montage playlist. So
Yeah.
it's yeah.
It's awesome. But they don't just tell you. They kind of set it up of the training is starting around this time, and the fight is going to take place on like Christmas Day or something like that. And so you get the sense that there's a section of time there, but they don't just tell you, they show you.
Hmm.
And I think this is it right here, of the reason the battles don't feel as good as they do when Jordan writes them is because he does too much just basically DM exposition. This is the dungeon master just telling you, okay, this battle happens, and it happens like this, and okay, now we move on.
Yeah.
Gee, thanks.
One of my beefs with this scene too is we, and this is in connection with the White Hill and the Gray Hill and all of that. Egwene's tactics here. She has a gift for Earth. We've gotten this since book 2. And why are you
That's
making
true.
a water tornado? The whole thing the whole theme in this battle is how they're wearing down and how they're
Mm-hmm.
losing energy and how the channelers aren't recovering and everything. I'm like, rip the freaking earth up from underneath them, because
Mm-hmm.
we also get from previous literature in this series, you use less energy when you play to your strengths. Healers do best at healing, and they can heal for a long period of time, but they try to make some like wind do something, they wear out. Andril makes massive gateways without getting worn out, but he wears himself out trying to
The
light
first
candles,
the
you
first
know?
Windfinder we ever meet.
Yeah. So it's, why aren't you ripping up the earth? Why aren't you making their armor crunch in on themselves? Things like that you could do with
Oh,
metal.
that would be such a cool way to, yeah. I don't think we've ever seen that. That would
Yeah,
that would make a ton of
it talks
sense.
about the armor they're wearing. They could be running in and just crush like little cans. That would be really directed
Turn all their weapons
firepower.
to rust.
Yeah, something like that. Or just
Uh,
make them really hot, you know?
yeah, that would be awesome. All right, do you have any thoughts on the interaction between Min and Egwene?
I thought it was it's unmemorable. It was okay. It
It
wasn't
was
the
fine.
worst banter.
Yeah.
It was just uh
Yeah, because my next note is when it switches to Ituralde's point of view.
Yeah, and I only
Um,
got one note on that, but it's probably a note that can be expanded on.
but um, so right at the beginning of that scene, he's watching this battle, and in his mind, um, his head throbbed. More dreams earlier tonight, so real, and but credit where it's due. This is a really well written section
Hmm.
from Sanderson. And this moment here really, I mean, it gets dark. You really feel it when you're inside Iturralde's head here. He had seen Trollocs eating members of his family alive and had been too weak to save them. He had struggled and wept as they ate Tamsin and his children, but at the same time, he had been lured by the sense of the boiling and burning flesh. At the end of the dream, he had joined the monsters in their feast. And my thought here that kind of just popped out of nowhere was this is actually why Grendel, not Simmerhaj, is the real ultimate torturer, the real master torturer, because she understands the mind.
Hmm.
Simmerhaj just knew the body and how to manipulate it.
There was a scene where Semmerhaj talks about mental distress
it.
and using that as a tactic.
But it was
So,
something kind of new to her because she was intrigued by the warder Aes Sedai bond.
hmm.
And that is what she was thinking was, this could be interesting. Grendel already knows these things. She already knows the mind. And so,
Well, remember, we also went over the history of Grendel. She
yeah.
was the goody two shoes. She wanted to help people before the war was open. And I can't remember what the event was, but something happened that basically jaded her to the point of, well, I'm just going to do the exact opposite. And that happens. That is a mental uh uh phenomenon that when you're this happens with like religious people and stuff. You're such a zealot, and then that thing you're a zealot for lets you down, and there's a clicking moment. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a break in your brain. It's like pain would be the right word. You have so much mental pain that you just switch to the exact opposite,
Mm-hmm.
and you want revenge.
And we don't know exactly when Grendel started doing this to the great captains, but we saw really early on, right from the beginning, when Rand finally shows up to Meridon, and Iturralde is suffering,
Mhm.
not just physically but mentally. He is clearly deep into some PTSD, and obviously rightly so. And
Which is
so,
funny because the reason I like this scene and what the thing I made a note about is we've got four different responses from four different captains, and we're gonna get them
yeah.
here in a little bit. Bashir was clear denial. Nothing's
Mm,
wrong with me. Nothing's wrong with me. Nothing's wrong with me. And he actually is so in denial that he becomes irate over it. So we get one response. We've got Agelmar, which is slow kind of realization, but from a beginning where he was like, "I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the right thing. Wait a minute." Now we got a little dissonance, and his dissonance kind of pulls him in. Iterolde was
and
the
then his
strongest of them
reaction
all.
is seppuku, is he's gonna kill
Yeah,
himself before Land stops him.
and Iterolde is like the whole time saying something is wrong. So he was actually the most difficult for the compulsion to take hold
Mm-hmm.
of. And he's also got that Matt kind of mind, which is more
Mm,
sensitive to inputs. He was the
yeah.
reactionary general. So
I had
he
thought about that, but that is because my other note on this scene is that when you get to the end, the fact that and the way that he's fighting back against whatever it is that Grendel is doing, I really like that. But I hadn't picked out that how different it is, and that each one is different.
mhm.
Because
Yeah, and he
we're gonna get Brine here in a little bit.
Agomar fell for it, and then some with the proper guidance got back to good. Iteralde never fully fell for it. He is fighting it the whole time, and he knows something's wrong, but he can't pick it out. But I mean, even now, even here, he's like, I'm trying to not give this order that for some reason my brain wants me to give. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
completely different reaction. And unfortunately, we don't get inside Brian's head here in a little bit, but
Yeah.
he becomes reserved. He's just like, yeah, you know what? I'm not the man for the job right now.
And I wonder how much of that is his inspiration being Robert E. Lee. and he was a very reserved individual.
Hmm.
Um, and so I'm wondering how much of that carries through, and then Agomar is kind of the iconic Bushido warrior poet. And Iturralde is what is his nickname? He's the wolf,
Hmm. Which
which
we've
which
talked about. Perrin's dichotomy here is the blacksmith is the control of the world around you, where the wolf is the be in the present moment, be
mhm.
be reactionary to your environment in a positive way.
But I hadn't thought about that, of how Matt has a little bit of all the great captains, but he is most like what we know of Iturralde as the
Hmm.
wolf, that he's most like that, especially when you look at the way he handles the Sanshin.
Hmm.
I'd never really thought about this before, but look at the campaign he creates against the Sanshin, and then look what Matt does against the Sanshin to get out of that trap, right?
Hmm.
And it's very similar, and I hadn't really thought of it before. All right.
In fact, it almost to me over the course of the books, and this is Jordan's and Sanderson's expanse of all of them, it's almost to me very clear that he was actually the best of the great captains.
Hmm.
Now, some of that's
Yeah.
exposure because you don't get a whole lot of Agomar till these battles, but some of that is exposure. But the depth of tactics that we go through with him versus, Brian is a great soldier, but it's very traditional,
Yeah. Well,
and
but there's, it's interesting that you bring that up, because the way he acts, his character, even the name of his horse, it's clear that there was a lot of inspiration of Robert E. Lee there. And yet he acts more like Grant,
mhm,
in that, because he comes from arguably the strongest nation. And Shelby Foote makes this point in Ken Burns' Civil War, that Lee is lauded, and rightfully so, but he took long risks. He took great chances because he had to. He was always the underdog. There was no way he was going to be able to grind out a battle or a campaign like Grant could in the
mhm,
wilderness on his way to Richmond. Is Lee couldn't do that. He was always the underdog. He always had to, if I'm going to win, I have to roll the dice. So in character, on the battlefield, he is much more like Matt, who's much more like Iturralde, because look at where Iturralde comes from. He doesn't come from one of the great nations. He comes from, kind of the backwater that's always and especially when we finally meet him, where the country has descended into civil war, and now we have these alien invaders that we have to deal with, that he's got to roll the dice, and he's got to take a long shot, because that's the only way he's going to win.
mhm,
All right. Then we switch back to Egwene, and this is where we get the confrontation with Brine. Min had mentioned that Matt wants control because he thinks Brine is a dark friend, and Gawain doesn't like it. It is one of the few good Egwene Gawain relationship moments where she's clearly concerned and thinking about him. I just don't think it's executed very well. It's a little too much tell instead of show
mhm,
with that, but I like that it's there. Um, there is this where is it? So it's right at the beginning of this switch to Egwene here, and she has this thought, because she's thinking, you know, about Brine and about Gawain, and she has this thought of, she can't understand why any Aes Sedai wouldn't have a warder, because they're just so darn useful, um, and so supportive. And here's where we have to cancel Jordan and Sanderson, because yeah, the ancient symbol of the Aes Sedai is the yin yang symbol, and you took away half of it,
mhm,
and the warder bond brings that other half back. But this is where they don't get it, because even Egwene, she has this thought, uh she could grumble at her warder. That was what they were for, wasn't it? And in a way, I kind of laughed and said, I don't know if she meant this or Sanderson meant this, but well, yeah, kind of. We've talked about this before of, okay, honey, is this a you need to vent, or you need me to find a solution? because I'm here for either. And sometimes you just got to vent. Sometimes you just got to rant. Sometimes you got to let it out with someone who, kind of what Brian was trying to teach Galwin is she doesn't need this hero from a book that you want to be. She needs a confidant. She needs a best friend because she can't do that. She's one of, if not the most powerful political ruler in the world. And she needs someone who, behind closed doors, she can be a person. And yeah, that's one of the things that he does for you that you don't get otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And back to your earlier point that is going to get you canceled and make it harder for you in this class is, and you get the masculine dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So you get that
Well, this
added
is this is
component that
why
you
I
don't
like a
have.
little bit of what happened in recent history with Gawain because he's doing that. He is sheltering her from the death he's bringing to himself for her
Yeah,
benefit.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know.
You get a couple of moments here where he doesn't seem tired and yet he's looking pale, and she
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know it's because he's using the rings off and on, and he's slowly dying. Yeah. Um, I just well, I'll grumble more about Godwin later when we get there.
Yeah. Now,
Okay,
her
here it
thought.
is.
Go ahead.
Her thought about Matt.
Yes.
This is
Initially, I
awesome.
made two notes because initially her first thought was strangely he's such a blowhard, a carouser, leering at every pretty woman he met, treating her like a painting and not a person. And I just, of course, I had just gotten out of this class, so said Egwene is annoying, but after social psych this week, maybe Sando has a talent for writing women.
So here's this scene. So right after she has that, she's thinking about Matt,
Hmm.
and the way Min phrased it was, how much do you trust him? And I actually, in hindsight, I was initially kind of grumbling because, Egwene's being Egwene. Shit, this is how she treats Rand. But then I kind of realized, well, yeah, this is how she treats Rand. This is how she treats boys and men. This is who she is. But to her credit, the way Min phrased it was not, do you like Matt? Do you think Matt's a swell guy? Do you think he's a good, upstanding citizen? No. Do you trust him? And then that worms in her head. She realizes, crap, no, yeah, I do trust him. And she recounts this story in her head that is so perfectly Matt. Once, when Egwene had been around 13, he jumped into the river to save Kim Lun from drowning. Of course, she hadn't been drowning. She'd merely been dunked under the water by a friend, and Matt had come running, throwing himself into the water to help. The men of Emmons Field had made sport of him for months about that. The next spring, Matt had pulled Jur Alhoun from the same river, saving the boy's life. People had stopped making fun of Matt for a while afterward. That was how Matt was. He'd grumbled and muttered all winter about how people made sport of him, insisting that next time he'd just let them drown. Then, the moment he'd seen someone in danger, he'd gone splashing right back in. Egwene could remember gangly Matt stumbling from the river, little Jur clinging to him and gasping, a look of pure terror in his eyes. And it just smacked me in the head like a brick of, this has to be from the notes, but either way, how to, and this is what I was thinking of to ideals, to your comment about Matt or about Sanderson getting it. I think he gets like 80% of it, because how do you not get Matt? Because it can't be more plain than this. This encapsulates the last several rants we have had about how Sanderson is getting the character of Matt wrong because he fundamentally doesn't understand the character of Matt. And Egwene just told you the character of Matt. This is who Matt is. This is his core. He grumbled for months. He grumbled all winter that next time, fine, you can just drown. But it didn't matter, because the second he saw someone go, and Matt was the one to see it. That's important too. Matt was the one to see it, not Perrin, not Rand, not one of the adults. Matt was the one who saw it, and he didn't think. He just jumped out of that hayloft to save Aludra.
Yeah, and that was one of my problems in this class last night because the literature we were reading, which social psych is wrong 75% of the wrong at the time, but and that's actually the data. That's not my opinion. Uh, was based on, oh, men are like this in modern society because of their social anxiety. I'm like, no, if there was an active shooter in the hall right now, y'all would all be locked in the room and I would be stopping it. And it wouldn't be because I felt the social pressure to be a man. No, it would be because I wouldn't even think about it. I've had a gun in my face for a dog. Call me John Wick if you want, but I told that guy, you are not gonna fight my dog, have his dog fight my dog, and he pulled a gun on me, and everybody else went inside and called the cops while I stared him down. I didn't think, oh, what are people gonna think of me when I do this? Am I getting my man card punched? No, it was instinctual. That's the thing. This is the part that women don't get. It is in our DNA. And the people that it is not there for, or they don't pass that test, are the ones with the anxiety because they realize where they are in that social structure, in that the hierarchy that is masculinity, right? They realize that and they're uncomfortable with it. Those are the people you should be talking to, not us real men, not the men that came to me and one of their brothers was dead. Not the firefighter, not the lines person. This is your literature. You're in this academic bubble, and Sanderson has a little bit of that bubble, but he got it right here. But also, this had to be the notes because this to me screams something that is used in literature a lot. He wanted to bring back your favorite scene with Matt of jumping down to save the woman in the dark. This is basically retelling that story, but a kid drowning.
Yeah. It's telling you why he jumped down without thinking to save
Mhm.
Aludra, because
Well,
that's who he is at his core.
and it needed to be a different story because Egwene wasn't there for Aludra. It had to be a pattern in his life.
Yeah.
And yeah. What do people think of me? Well, they made fun of me the last time. It happened again. If I'm thinking about people making fun of me, am I going to do the thing that needs to be done? No, I'm just going to do the thing.
Yeah. There's also, I hadn't even thought about this, but there's kind of a great moment here of an understandable, even though if it makes her unsympathetic, which is where she also thinks, and he came to rescue me in the stone of Tyr, the freaking stone of Tyr. And but then she also thinks, but then he also tried to save me from the Aes Sedai because he didn't really think I was Amarillan. Well, yeah, he doesn't like or trust Aes Sedai, and you're his friend. He thought you needed to be rescued from them, but you're holding that against him. That's one of the big reasons that you resent him, was because when you were raised Amarillan, he didn't believe it.
Yeah, and then there's a different response you can always have. And this is again something that the more feminine types, I'm not going to say male or female because it could be feminine males, uh, don't get. There's a third option. It's not, oh, you saved me or you didn't save me and you're an idiot. It's not this time, but thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't need it this time, but hold that thought because I may need it some other time. You
Yeah.
keep that character, whatever you want to call it, that part of yourself that is that sweet guy, that is that brave guy, that is all these things. You keep that for the next time because I still may need you, and I appreciate it. I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate your concern for me right now, just not this time. There's a
All
third
right.
option.
Um, I'm gonna hold any thought you have about Brian's reaction to being told he's being compelled for a second, because I actually have a thought on that at the beginning of the next chapter where we start with Matt, and Matt is evaluating the military situation here. And so put a pin in that for just a second. But before we get to that, there's this line that is interesting, but only kind of academically. And this is one of the complaints about the Sharans showing up out of nowhere. And as our last social episode, culture matters, and we know next to nothing about their culture, because there's this interesting line where he's using the the technique of the gateway to look down on the battlefield, and the Domine who's doing this is the Sharin he captured, and she learned it from seeing Yukiri's weave, and that's where she learned the idea. But in that, Matt has this thought of the Soldam had said, let's see, where is it? So Matt thinks it was unnerving how quickly the Sharan woman had taken to her captivity. And he thinks the Soldam say it usually takes months to properly train a Domine, and yet after only an hour or two of resistance, the Sharan was immediately a subservient, willing, and eager Domine. And I mean, that's an interesting thought of why. What is it about these people? But of
Yeah, because
course,
we
who
get the
knows?
impression from Egwene's observations that the males are like dogs. They're very loyal dogs, but the male channelers are like dogs. But we get the impression from her interaction with one of the female channelers that they actually have some status.
Yeah.
So it's like, are the female channelers also dogs? Because that would be very
Are they just
uh
the pack leader? I don't know.
yeah, that would make it to where it's easy to put them on a leash.
I mean,
So it's
the only thing we know is that um, from Egwene's observation, you can fall and fall far in this culture, and it's a very rigid kind of caste system. So maybe that's part of it. My other thought, actually, it's been attributed to Voltaire, but I don't know that he said it. I don't know if anyone knows who said it, but those who make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities.
hmm.
And we get a little glimpse of that with the Sharans and Bow the Wild and Demandred, of those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And there is definitely, we referenced this before, of there seems to be an almost Aztec element to the Sharans, and Quetzalcoatl and Bow the Wild and all that. So maybe
Well,
they are running around
I
doing
think
human
I commented
sacrifices.
on that you mix all of the major Central
Mm-hmm.
American major societies, the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incans
Yeah,
together, and you
yeah.
kind of get that conglomerate. Yeah.
Which is what Jordan was so good at doing. But then what was actually in the notes of what this culture is, and you know we needed more of it to make this thought be more than just an academic exercise of, ooh, ooh, that should kind of hit, and it doesn't really. All right, but then down down the page.
Wait, let me bitch on one thing on the
Okay.
beginning of that chapter first. I had just given Sanderson some praise for writing something really well in Egwene's thoughts about Matt and how it led to her trusting him. And then he ruins it on the very beginning of chapter 32 when Matt has a thought about maybe I should go out again and do a little more fighting.
Oh God, yeah. And it, again, it's either he absolutely doesn't get Matt, or he wanted this silly moment and he needed a reason for it, of having him look at Tawan and Tawan giving him that look of, I know what you're thinking and I don't like it.
Mhm.
He wanted that haha moment, so he needed a setup, and the fact that the setup makes absolutely no sense for the character isn't important.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's not like you didn't have source material for this. We have 10 books of Matt saying, I need to avoid the fighting. You just had a moment just a few pages earlier that says he'll do the thing without thinking, but he doesn't want to do it. And he will even tell you he doesn't want to do it. And then you just have him saying, I should go do it.
The last thing we get from Jordan is is him in that fight with the Sanshin, and the Death Watch guard guys saying, Highness, shouldn't you be putting on your armor? And he once again makes the point of the general who leads from the front ain't leading. He doesn't plan on being in the fight. He's back here to direct the fight, not to be in the fight.
Mhm.
And then now he wants to get into the fight. Ugh. This almost would have worked if the, again, back to what we kind of ranted about last time, of it wasn't as bad as I remembered, because I could see what he was trying to do. if he would have executed that better and had the thought here been, man, Tawan was really impressed when I went into battle. You know, maybe if I did that again, we could have a little conjugal visit here when things quiet down. If he'd have had a thought along those lines of let me flex for my lady,
See,
okay.
Matt's too smart for that. I see she has made clear that we're gonna copulate so I can get pregnant. She has made that clear. He should do the Al Bundy and go get a vasectomy, eh, and not tell Peggy. Uh, you remember that episode
No,
where he didn't tell Peggy he had the vasectomy, and she's like, guess she gets the baby fever, so he's getting laid every night.
the parts of Married with Children I remember the most because he's just Ed O'Neill is just so awesome. Were the all of the scenes I thought were best were his shoe store scenes.
Oh yeah,
With
yeah.
this, those those to me were the best and most problematic, and we all have to be canceled now.
Which is funny
Okay.
because the viral videos on like Instagram and TikTok now are the guys and the girls in a panel and they're both being ridiculous to each other.
Uh-huh.
We already had that. We had the shoe store scenes with Al Bundy.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, back to my point here. This uh down the page here, we're on the second page of chapter 32, and this is where Demandred is ranting and raving, and Matt is trying to figure out what he's going to do. But to your point, one, he wasn't the best general. He was a good general, but he wasn't the best. Samael was. And two, he's kind of acting crazy. So how do you can't have it both ways, Sanderson. He can't be a raving lunatic who just wants to duel the loose Theron and finish this one-on-one, and also being this, incredibly clever general who's probing his defenses, and I've got to be 4 steps ahead, and you can't have it both ways. But then he kind of compounds it with Matt thinking about Brine here. And this is, where is it? It starts with, it had taken a true military genius.
Mhm.
Uh, da, 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 da.
Okay, so my note on that while you're looking for your spot was this is where Sanderson's insistence on all the details in the battles bites him in the ass because
Yes.
he says something to the extent of uh looking like the army was in a bad situation, that sort of
Yes.
thing didn't happen by accident. But every instance that we got as the reader was something that was obvious to a normie that
And
it would have been a stupid move. And
well, but also it contradicts what Brine said, which was they were all little mistakes. They were all very small mistakes, but they were all mistakes that could have been recovered. You were recoverable. It's just I never did. I would then make another little mistake. And then I would think I can recover from this. But then there would be another little mistake. And he thought he was going crazy. It's what is wrong with me? But he kept thinking, no, I can fix this. I can fix this. I can fix this. It's the guy, who keeps, it's the one-armed bandit, because the next pull is going to be the win. The next pull is going to be the win. The next pull
mhm.
is going to be the jackpot. And he kept doing that. But then compounding that even further is this thought: the nature of Brian's trap had been subtle, as hard to see as a yellow flower spider crouching on a petal. That's how Matt had known. It had taken true military genius to put the army into such a bad situation without it looking like the army was in a bad situation. That sort of thing didn't happen by accident.
Which
Actually, yeah,
actually
it
brought me
can.
to a real world thing because this was the whole, oh, mistakes were made during COVID thing. And Brett Weinstein goes on his long rant of mistakes go in random directions. Everything pushed in the same direction of increasing governmental
Yep.
power and da 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 da. And that's the thing. That's why Matt was able to do it because he's a pattern guy. And he was able to say everything's going in the same direction, which is bad wrong. If it was random mistakes, some would be bad, some would be good, some would work in your favor, some would not.
Some would be
And
neutral.
yeah, some would be
Yeah.
neutral. Yeah.
And the other problem here that jumped out at me, and my first thought of, wait, no, the person doing this is Grendel. She's not a military genius. She's a psychiatric genius. And that's how she knows how to manipulate these individuals because she knows what buttons to push, what things to make them see in their dreams, to unhinge them, to make them make mistakes. The only way this could be an absolutely perfect plan is if she's coordinating, which then gives you the other problem I have with the Mandarin's ranting and raving of, well, they can't be coordinating, or you've got a massive plot hole here, Sanderson, which is why hasn't anyone told the Mandarin Rand's at Shao Gul?
Don't. Especially since she knows he's there because she's visited.
She has to know he's there because she's been at that army site too.
Mm-hmm.
But which is even without that, how does he not know there's another army at Shao Gul? Is what so there's the other massive plot hole of Demandred's ranting and raving about face me Luce Theron is how the hell does he not know that Luce Theron's not here?
Yeah, the only rebuttal I would have to that in a fantastical world where compulsion is a thing is her compulsion could be something in the direction of using their ability to make mistakes, as in putting some sort of compulsion in there that is, you work for me
Mm-hmm.
and do the best you can, but don't get caught doing it. And so
Yeah,
there's this underlying thing where they're self-sabotaging. They don't know why, but they're doing the thing. And
she she doesn't need to she doesn't need to know the tactics necessary. She just needs to set the stage.
mhm.
So, yeah. Um, my next note isn't until we get to Galad's section, which is a good 10 pages away. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts on what's going on here. Um, because we do get some
609 for me 609.
Min starts viewing for Tawan, and that's interesting and
Yeah,
back and
yeah.
forth and blah
I,
blah
I
blah.
like the interaction with Matt and Galgan. This is actually good
Uh-huh.
banter.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Oh,
because we do get that cult, even though I think it's overdone, the assassin culture, I think it's
yeah.
overdone. I think it fit here because we've already got that already. So the overdoing of the assassin culture is done. So it actually does fit that he's like, I'll give you some practice guys first, you know. And so that I thought was actually kind of fun. And actually, I liked General Galgan as a minor character, so I think
Yeah.
that fit there. And to see him kind of getting along with Matt, even though they're rivals, was a little bit fun.
Yeah.
He strays away from his analogy with Matt being like Grant with the whole we need to pick the battlefield thing because that's a very not Matt thing to do. Uh, when he suggests we need to get to Marilor and all that. But I understand the plot had to get there.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that was just a minor detail, but
Well, we
uh
see a little bit of it from the very beginning when we see him setting up the battle in front of Karheen because he does
mm,
talk about the terrain and how that's going to affect the movement of armies and blah 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 blah.
yeah.
So we do know that from his memories he knows that you know you 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 either have to pick the terrain or you have to adjust to the terrain. And so it everything he's doing makes sense and is all generic enough to get that he doesn't get Sanderson doesn't lose himself in the details like he tends to do.
Hmm.
Um, that'll come again later, but for now it's fine. And there'll be more men into one later that I think we'll have more thoughts on. Um, so the next section, after a long section, and after they coordinate with the Aes Sedai and Elaine, and then it switches to uh back to Elaine's battlefield, but it's Galad's point of view, which I really like. So it opens really strong with another off-screen death, but this one really hits because when we first got that Galad point of view in the prologue that we spent so long talking about, because it was so good to finally get, up until then, all we knew about Galad was from Elaine and Gawain and Egwene's points of view and thoughts on him. And now we actually see no, this is why he does what he does. This is why he thinks the way that he thinks. This is once you get behind his eyes, it's oh, it's only natural that he would have joined the White Cloaks. It makes
Hmm.
perfect sense. Um, and so, uh, not to get off on a tangent or into spoilery territory, but I did have a thought of I'm referenced Game of Thrones earlier, and Gallad reminds me in a lot of ways of Jaime Lannister because in that, especially in the lead up to, and then immediately after he loses his hand, I was like, crap, why are you making me start to like this guy? Because the first time you see him, you're like, this is the worst, disgusting a-hole in the whole in the whole fantasy world here.
Hmm.
And then after a couple seasons, you realize, oh, this is why he is the way that he is, and he's actually kind of understandable. Oh, now that I understand him, he's actually kind of likable. And and Gallad reminds me a lot of Jaime Lannister in that way of when you first encounter him, you don't like him and you're not supposed to like him, and then you actually get to know him and you're like, I like this guy. Crap, I like this guy. And there will be some ranting about that here later, but for now, Trom was one of those that we saw that was standing with Gallad from the beginning, and I think he was the one who said, "You defeated the Knight Commander in single combat. You're the captain now.
Yeah, or it
You're in
was
charge."
yeah, it was either you're the captain now or you deserve the heron or whatever. Because remember, Galad also didn't want the heron mark blade.
Yeah, I think it may have been both, but Trom was
Hmm.
one of the brain farting, whatever they call the 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 group of commanders that are right under
Hmm.
the captain, the Lord Captain Commander. He was one of them. He'd been recently elevated because of the fighting with the Sanjin had killed so many. Um, and it just opens with Galad closed Trom's eyes. He'd searched the battlefield north of Karheen for over an hour to find him. Trom had bled out. Ouch, because we know he could have been saved. We know there were healers. Um, and only a few corners of his cloak were still white. Galad ripped the officer's knots off his shoulder, amazingly unsoiled, and stood up. He felt weary to the bone. And one of the reasons this scene is so great is because then at the towards the end of the scene, it calls back to that weary to the bone when Elaine says, "You really need to let one of the Aes Sedai or Ashaman wash away your fatigue," and he says, "No, absolutely not. One, it's a reminder, and two, if I'm not tired anymore, I'll push my men too hard. I need to know what they feel.
Hmm.
I need to be aware of what's going on. I need to be aware of reality." Is basically what he's saying. Is reality is what matters. Um, now where'd my notes go? I've lost my train of thought. Oh, there we are. Um, but before we even get to that, the end there, he has this great thought here, just down a little bit from that, when he's thinking about Elaine and how she's matured and how she thought and acted too much with her heart when she was younger, and now she's grown harder, but not in a bad way like the way Rand did. Um, but we still don't like her, but that's for totally different reasons.
Well, I was about to say she has grown harder, but she also lost the ability to see what's happening to everybody else
Yep,
around her when she does it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and he has this thought. Now, if only she could write her. Now, if only he could write her moral compass. She wasn't a bad person, but Galad wished that she, like other monarchs, could see as clearly as he did. He was beginning to accept that they didn't. He was beginning to accept that it was all right so long as they tried their best. Whatever he had inside of him that allowed him to see the right of things was obviously a gift of the light, and holding others to scorn because they had not been born with it was wrong. That is a great character moment, and makes him so understandable and so much more likable of, I want more of this guy now, dang it.
See, I think it also adds a layer of hubris because most of the atrocities of the world have been done by somebody who thought they were right. And to quote Robert Greene, the author of 48 Laws of Power, the people who are sure they're right on everything are the most stupid people in the world.
But I think that is part of Galad's growth here from when we first see him to when he first joins the children to when we finally get behind his eyes and he is trying to those some of the few genuine great moments later the where when he encounters Morgase and they have their interactions and she's trying to tell him basically he's giving practical application to the lessons that Morgase taught him in those moments of the world is full of gray. Good men will do bad things and bad men will do good things. And that's kind of what he's saying here is that because he's 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 referenced this before that the children have a problem not just of perception but of reality of we have pushed too hard too often. I mean, basically, what he's saying is the children have too often expected perfection when just doing your best and trying to be a good person and trying to be a walk in the light, that should be enough. And we should encourage that, not viciously persecuting those who don't meet our standards of perfection,
Mm-hmm.
which is ironic since everything we learned about him at first from Elaine was, oh, well, he's little Mr. Perfect and he never makes a mistake and it's annoying.
Well, which is kind of on topic with one of the comments we had a while ago, several episodes ago from Isomorphic about the White Cloaks could have been this army that was perfect for fighting the shadow and everything. And unfortunately, in this whole series, we get a kind of a bouncing back and forth of caricatures of culture and reality of humans because I think Jordan really wanted to pull a reality of humans element into the whole thing, but also he fell prey to kind of glorifying things like the Aiel, how they're this next step up in combat. You know, the caricature of the Aes Sedai where they're bumbling idiots that are the best people in the world at the same time. And one of the things with the White Cloaks is they are this uh, organization of zealots that are just human and actually didn't know what they were fighting the whole time. Whereas, yeah, we could have got more of a wake up call to of humanity and the flaws of humanity in all of these different ways. But I think there was a little bit of bouncing back and forth. So I like the direction they went, where they're dying in combat against Trollocs and they can't deal with it because they had this hubris of they thought they understood, but they
Mm-hmm.
didn't.
Oh, this
But
is
we,
really what the shadow is. We only
yeah.
thought we knew what the shadow was.
But I think Jordan fell prey to it too, where he kind of did glorify certain
Mm-hmm.
places over others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of, there's this interesting thought here at the end of this chapter when Tam is speaking and when Galad is thinking about Perrin and how he missed Perrin because Perrin was a natural leader and one of the reasons that Galad thinks that Perrin is a natural leader is, and maybe this is a trait of the two rivers, is that you can be blunt and direct and you're not going to hurt his feelings. He's not going to get bent out of shape when you tell him this is what is. He's going to say, okay, well, then how do we deal with that? And so he thinks maybe the two rivers will be the new home of the children. And I'm
But then
like,
he has that reflection of, but we do have history.
but, and again, it's one of those great, as much as I love the open ended what happens next ideas, it would have been so cool to actually have some sequels and see some of these things of wait, do the children actually end up there? Because I mean, they're not exactly
I,
vassals, but right now they're sworn to Perrin.
people can fight me on this because everybody's got a soft spot for the Borderlanders, but all of Faldara and all of Shiner is burned to the ground right now. That's
Mm,
the new home for the children because you would be fighting the shadow every day.
yeah. Well, yeah, because we know even after the because from that flashback in Shadow Rising, when Rand sees the very beginning, or not, he sees the end of the war, and there's that soldier that's like, well, what am I going to do now? But we know from then that even if the Dark One is sealed away, all of the Shadow Spawn still exist, so they
Hmm.
still have to be fought. So there's still going to be a there. There's still going to be some fighting left to do. That's even in one of the prophecies. What is it? Um the last battle fought, but the world not done with war, or something like that. And it's
Hmm.
it's saying it's, yeah, the last battle of this age, but reality keeps going. The world keeps spinning around. There will always be conflict.
Or even somewhere like the field of Marilor itself, which was kind of a vacant area near the borderlands where you could be a force deployed to anywhere that needed you on the edge of the blight.
Oh, you know what? I hadn't even thought about that, but
Or even
I,
the
I,
blight should recede after this whole thing.
I gotta think this was on purpose, but um, Jordan set up the Fields of Marilor way back in book two. Because remember, one of Ingtar's comments, one of the little clues, one of the little foreshadows that he had fallen was him complaining about how humanity is in decline. And one of his kind of justification of that was, look at all this nothingness. There used to be nations here. There used to be towns and villages and people here. And now it's just these random small little hamlets just clinging on in the wilderness, and resenting us because we don't protect them, but they're not part of our nation because there's just nothing here. And if you look at the map between Shinar and the White Tower, it's just nothingness, right? That the world of man is in decline.
Hmm.
And I've got to think that was on purpose, that Jordan was setting up, this is where the last battle is going to be, because there's nothing here. All right. Uh chapter 33. We start with Perrin. And I had this thought in these opening couple of pages here. Welcome to
Funny,
Krusty Burger.
it's funny you made that noise because the whole fight scenes with Isam and Perrin in this stage of the game, I just can't get like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner out of my mind, and it kind of is wearing at me at this point. He said even the dust poofed out in a ring around him. I'm like, oh, should hold up a sign that says "Yikes" before he falls. I don't know. You
This is one of the things I went back and forth with in my mind when I read this, is that in some ways it seems like we've suddenly changed genres, because even with, you know, magic and monsters, Jordan's world was very grounded and real. Um, the magic wasn't nearly as subtle as it is in Tolkien, but it was not as over the top as, say, the Forgotten Realms, the D&D setting where you have, where you have so much magic it's practically steampunk in certain areas,
know. Hmm.
right? It's almost Age of Legends like, where they use magic to create things that we would see as high-tech stuff. And in a lot of ways it feels like we have gone from this grounded traditional Western fantasy to an anime. And that is why this part in particular is one of the reasons I always thought that it would make a much better animated series than a live action series. And a lot of it was the stuff that happens in the World of Dreams in general, but especially what happens in the World of Dreams here at the end with Perrin. Um,
Which is
but it,
funny because this is one of the scary things about what is going to happen in season 3 of the show is it's supposed to be highly centered around the world of dreams.
oh boy,
Yeah.
I can't wait for that. I'm sure it's going to look fantastic. Um, but I did have the thought right at the beginning here of, do you think there's a purposeful parallel to Rand's battle in the sky in the Great Hunt that's going on here as they're bouncing around the clouds fighting each other? Is
I didn't
this
see that, so I don't know. So if it was purposeful, it was subtle enough that some people would get it and some people wouldn't. But
I'm wondering if it was whether it was Jordan or if it was Sanderson. Let's take that moment that was very kind of subtle and turn it up to 11. Um, the other
I
thought
see.
I
I just took it as they're just going. He already. So this is the creep. This is kind of a concept creep thing where he's done so many things with him falling off a dock and he's in the water and now he's not in the water and all these things that he just keeps having to take it to another level every time he
yes.
brings up this fight. So the fight just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
And because of that, there's a line here just on the second page, on page 563 for me here, that I think kind of gets lost, and it made me wonder: is there significance here, or is this just to your point? Just you keep having to turn up the volume until all you hear is noise, which is the storm was far worse than it had been, and it just kind of it suddenly struck me: is there any significance or symbolism to the fact that the Dark One's storm, because we know this is the Dark One's influence because we see it at Shalgul, and it's only the Bull of the Winds that keeps it from going crazy up there.
Mhm.
Um, is there any significance or symbolism to the fact that the Dark One's storm is able to run wild in the world of dreams, but not in the corporeal world?
I think because the world of dreams is closer to the pattern itself,
Hmm.
and we're about to see from Rand's point of view where the pattern lies in that void. So I think that probably would be the answer to that, though I couldn't tell you.
Hmm.
Which you see that he was able to touch the world of dreams before he was able to touch the world earlier in the series. Ishi
Mm-hmm.
was able to touch
Mm-hmm.
the world of dreams before he was able to touch the world. So,
Yeah, that's true because the first thing we see of that is actually the bad dreams that Rand starts having
mhm.
on their way to Baralon. Yeah.
Now, one thing I do have to ask, and tell me if I'm chasing straws here, but whether this is Jordan from the notes or this is Sanderson writing, how much of a Pearl Jam fan are they?
What?
Because it's for me 619, but it starts with Slayer giving some it's a dialogue between him and Perrin, and he says, "If you knew my life,
Mm-hmm.
you'd howl. The
Mm-hmm.
hopelessness, the agony. I soon found my way, my power. In this place, I am a king." And I would like to read the lyrics from Pearl
Oh.
Jam's Jeremy. I won't play the song because we would get striked for that. At home, drawing pictures of mountain tops, with him on top, lemon yellow sun, arms raised in a V, and the dead lay in pools of maroon below.
Hmm.
King Jeremy the Wicked, oh, ruled this world. And it's just it's the manifestation of someone with a horrible childhood going internally into their own world and creating it. That's exactly what the dream world is. The dream world is your brain's manifestation of your idea of the world. That's why they can control it.
That's an interesting thought. Or how much of this was just, again, as we've talked about, because the Slayer obviously predates Sanderson by a lot of his writing, of how much was this Jordan just intuitively understanding human psychology, even if he didn't know the technical
Mhm.
aspects of it.
Well, this goes back to Freud. I mean, this is not new. This is, you know, late 1800s. So it's it is a tendency for people in those situations, very abusive situations, to find an internal world to escape to. And it's a coping mechanism. So it's not actually a horrible thing unless you become King Jeremy the Wicked in your own little world because you harbor that resentment. and Isam, Lord Luke, whichever one. I guess Isam would have been the one with the horrible childhood because he was the one that lived in the Blight, and then he killed Luke but became him, according to the legends.
Hmm.
So, uh, which now that I'm thinking about it, why isn't that a bigger part of Rand's thoughts? Because that's kind of what's
Hmm.
going to happen here in a minute.
Hmm.
But
Interesting.
yeah,
Um,
so yeah, it's the inner world, and we're in the dream world, which is a manifestation of your consciousness. And
yeah. And then we switch to Fail's point of view, which I like. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Is Perrin is pretty grievously wounded in this fight, and we finally get to what Fail is doing, and it makes sense that we would shift to her, right? Um, but a couple pages in, as she's in Tarvalon making her, you know, this is actually this is a good illustration of something you've kind of ranted about the difference in the way Jordan would write things versus the way Sanderson tends to is this is where he's good because the last time we saw her was Perrin talking to Elaine and saying, "You might as well tell me because I'm just going to tell my wife everything anyway,"
mhm,
and then recommends her as the one to get the horn. And they come up with this plan of how they're going to do it. Well, we don't need to see the plan. All we need is we have Fail here at the White Tower, and this is she's made several of these runs already from different locations. So, she has developed a routine, so nothing here should be out of the ordinary. So we don't need to see the other things. We can just have that brief moment of her thinking. Again, back to the, what I ranted about earlier in Egwene's point. We don't need to know how long she's been doing this. We just need to know that she's been doing this. This is what she's been doing.
mhm,
And now we come to her because this is the moment where it matters, which is here's the horn, right? Which is ultimately what this was all about, was to set this up. Um, but but then you have this interesting thought of hers several pages in, um, where I kind of thought, if I if I was who I was when I first started reading this series, because I was already married and when did this come out? Yeah, I was already married, had two kids, had both my kids by this point. Um, so very different person than when I'm the single college freshman when I first start reading the series. Going, she's kind of annoying,
mhm.
when she really when that relationship first starts to get going in Shadow Rising, and so she has this thought here. Where is it? It's on page 570 for me. Of where she's thinking, did yeah, on the one hand, I'm flattered that Perrin was the one to recommend me for this important thing, but on the other hand, did he do it? Um, she wondered idly if he had done it to keep her off the battlefield. She wouldn't mind terribly if he'd done so, though she would never tell him that. In fact, once this was all said and done, she would insinuate that she was offended and see how he reacted. He needed to know that she would not sit back and be coddled, even if her true name implied otherwise. And I can see how young me would have read that and been further proof of why she's so annoying and why Perrin deserves better. But on the other hand, now I can look at it and go, well, actually, that makes sense. Even if I don't like it, it makes sense and it's understandable.
It's still
Of,
annoying.
oh, this is why she does what she does.
Yeah.
Um, and my thought was, how much does this kind of, not exact in situation or wording, but this exact idea, how much does this consciously versus unconsciously happen from the fairer sex? Because this does seem like a very female thing to do, a very feminine thing to do, maybe is a better way to say it, a very feminine thing to do. Of, I'm going to, in an almost Machiavellian kind of way, say this thing I don't really believe to get to get a reaction or to gauge a reaction. but that idea makes what she does when we first meet her, when we don't get her points of view, makes it so much more understandable.
Mm-hmm.
I assumed you would have thoughts on that because of the thoughts you tend to have.
No, we're
Uh,
gonna let that one slide.
okay.
Yeah.
And then Bubble of Evil, and then they end up in the Blight.
No,
Uh,
this is the cross-ex mind reading, right? Because he's going to hear her words and he's going to think they're just genuine words. So he's going to answer accordingly. And he's going to make the decision in his mind to say, it's the old, does this make me look fat? You know, of course it doesn't make you look fat, curly fat, but of course it doesn't make you look fat, honey. I love you just the way you are. That's that's the little balance we have to play. So, and it's just, I just wish, but that's because I'm a guy. I wish there wasn't so much of what she was doing in that
mhm.
interplay. Mhm.
All right. Then it switches to Avienda, who, as I've said before, I think he's one of the better characters that Sanderson writes. Um, I think perhaps one, because we don't get a ton of her from Jordan, and two, because she's a pretty rigid character, and that seems to work for him. You know, in some ways, what the awful showrunners are doing kind of makes sense because there is a lot of similarity between Avienda and Perrin, and he also writes Perrin pretty well. So
Did you skip over the Rand section?
no,
Do we have two Avienda sections?
I think so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it goes back to Fael and then okay, yeah, that's right.
Yep.
All right.
So this is Avienda in camp, and she senses some channeling. She goes to investigate, and I had this random thought here when she comes upon these red veils, and she doesn't. That's a little bit of a plot hole to me that I don't, because even in the dark, it goes. They take such pains to show what an awesome ninja Avienda is, and wouldn't the red be one of the first things she notices? Because otherwise they rare cat and soar, except they have red veils, and that's going to stand out even in the dark, especially in the dark.
Except they unveil when they attack.
Yeah, but it's still, I'm assuming, like the regular cat and soar, it hangs loose around their
Mm.
necks, and they pull it up when it's time to fight. Um, but anyway, um, but she has this thought of after she's been grabbed, and then they yeah, so when she finally does notice the red veils, it's after she's been shielded and bound in air, and they wore red veils, but this one had taken his down for the fight. Why? What was this? No Aiel she knew did that. And it just kind of suddenly dawned on me because we we talked a bit about Nakomi, the invented character um that Avienda talked to, that was apparently of the Jinn because they still exist. And it just dawned on me that would have been the perfect place to tease both of these. Is we have basically two tribes of Aiel that are unknown. We have the Jinn, the lost tribe, the 13th tribe, and we have this, what I would call this unknown 14th tribe that they inadvertently create by sending their men up to Spit and Sight Blinder's Eye. And we we could have had a tease about this, and then they could have been muddied up. So like they could have been kind of mixed up of you don't know that they're two separate things necessarily. And then it might take a minute for the reader to realize, oh wait, there's these are two separate things. They're actually two lost tribes. Anyway, random thought of because we did kind of rant about the how the idea that the Jinn still exist out there just came out of nowhere, and there's no clue to it except that Sanderson said it's there in the notes.
Hmm. Yeah, and to hide a whole tribe would be something special.
Yeah,
It's
even if they're not as big as, because you kind of complained about how big the tribes are, even though they live in the freaking Sahara, and
hmm
the numbers are huge. But even if they're not that big, you still have to be pretty sizable to be genetically viable for 3,000 years.
Well, I mean, again, this is where the size comes in because we got the Dunbar law of 150, right? 150 is good enough.
Okay, I didn't
Yeah,
know that there was a hard number for that. I
yeah,
knew
that's
there was a number, but
yeah. The Dunbar number is the amount of people we can have in our lives that we're adapted to. That's why cities suck for us.
no, no, no,
Yeah.
no, but I meant genetically for procreation.
Oh no, but that's because the average tribe was about 150.
Oh,
Because
okay.
after that point, it
They
became problematic. But
they swarm
before that
they
point,
swarm like bees.
yeah, before that
Yeah.
point, it we you like you said, it wouldn't be genetically viable. So it was kind of the happy number. Now, the thing is, the reason I don't mind the red veils is because we have an answer for that through Issam's point of view, is we
Yes.
have this place in the blight that they live. Now, the Gen apparently have been living among us, in the waste. That's going to be a little harder to hide, even if there's over 3,000 years. If
Oh,
there's only
that's something I
150.
hadn't considered is that they aren't a separate tribe. They just live there are jinn amongst all the tribes that
See,
are
that's where you
secretly.
could have pulled the blacksmiths don't have to fight thing.
Oh
You know,
no, I had this thought and I forgot to write it down because I had this thought after I was done reading of this is actually something Sanderson could have inserted because Sanderson should know about this fan theory. And Jordan would have known too, possibly because we know he liked to look at the fan theories and he got lots of letters, but he would also go on the forum sometimes just to see what the fans were saying and occasionally troll them because he was an a-hole. But especially about the death of Asmodean. But anyway, one of the theories that was really popular for a long time was what was called the purple Ajah. So for
mhm.
anyone who doesn't know, because if you're like Ideals, you're new, or Scott, if you didn't play around on the forums way back in the day, the idea went like this. It started with Vannon, not Vannon. Vannon was Varen. We just read Vannon, so my brain. Anyway, the people were trying to figure out is Varen Black Ajah because in some way she acted like it. Like in book two, you think maybe we caught her in a lie. So if she can lie, she's Black Ajah, but she doesn't do bad things. In fact, she does good things. In fact, she helps the light a lot. So the theory went like this. Well, if there can be an underground Ajah dedicated to evil, why can't there be one dedicated to the light? And more so than what the servants already are, because they are ostensibly dedicated to the light. But the theory went, why
They're
not an
dedicated to themselves.
yeah, exactly. Why not an Ajah that is underground and totally focused on the light and the dragon and the end times prophecies and making sure that the White Tower is ready for it and does the right thing, and they could somehow unbind themselves from the oaths or change their oaths so that they could do it more effectively. So you already have this idea of this underground purple Ajah, you know, uh, special agents for the light. You could have adapted that to the Jinn, and you could have teased that somewhere earlier on before we run into this person, and then even if it's a small clue, that could have been our clue where we look back and say, "Oh, that's where she came from," because there's just I did see a few fan theories right after these books were released when I was still looking on the forums of maybe she's Jin, but it was out of left field. It was because I got nothing else, so why not,
Mm.
right? But that would have been a place Sanderson, especially being a fan and being in the fan community before he started writing these books or even started writing his own books, that would have been something that he could have added with his experience and where he comes from. Anyway, um, but then the very end of this chapter, there's a comment from Darlin Cisnera, King of Tyr, that made me wonder if this is the answer to my World of Dreams question earlier, because Aviendha warns him that the reason I was here in the first place was because I sensed a female channeler, and then we had this fight with her, and she got away, and so there was a dreadlord snooping around your tent while you were sleeping, and Darlin paled like Yturalde. Light, they didn't touch me, I swear it. He raised a hand to his head. Who do we trust if we cannot trust our own minds? And if the world of dreams represents the mental, the psychic, and that's where the Dark One's real power is. If the Dark One is an avatar of Satan, and maybe Jordan channeling a little bit of his own theology of what is the fall of man, isn't some great act on the part of the serpent. It's just, but did God really say? And then you fast forward, you bookend it at the beginning of the New Testament with the temptation of Jesus of, hey, why don't you just, you could do this, you could do that. Why don't you, do this and I'll give you this, right? And so the Dark One is stronger in the world of dreams because the Dark One's strength is an idea.
Mm.
Because I referenced Ingtar earlier. The man is in decline. Can man save himself, or are you going to need some help? And I don't see the creator around here offering a hand, but I'll give you a hand.
Well, and that's the point I made at the very end of the last episode, which is, what if it's the destruction of the pattern? It's not destruction of things. And the pattern is fate. And to Ingtar's question, can a man save himself? Not if he's fated not to.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have a world based on fate that has these working parts that all go in the right direction, even if it manifests as what we call bad things in the world, then you truly have no free will. You have no control. And to go back, we'll go to the Bible. What was the apple? The knowledge of good and evil. It is the breaking of your blissful ignorance, of your fated life through existence. It was the Pandora's box in other mythology, right? We see a little visual of what's happening in the blackness here in a second with the pattern as it's coming together. Maybe it's just chaos that comes out of it, and there is no more fate.
Well, speaking of, the another reason I'm more and more inclined to think that one of the things Jordan was working on before his death were the Rand scenes, is because we don't get a lot of Rand POVs, and when we do get them, they're pretty short.
Mm-hmm.
So it more and more inclines me to think that's what's going on, because it opens up with Rand. We finally see, okay, what happened when he touched that blackness, and now we finally see, and it's barely a page long, but it's a hefty page. It's what do I pick which part. I mean, because the one thing that jumped out at me, but I'm sure there's tons of things you could talk about just in this brief little section, is when he's looking around and explaining what he's seeing. One of the last line of this first chat paragraph is, at least that was how his mind chose to interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
It's physics, figs, and mice. Basically, is Jordan channeling a little bit of Lovecraft, but also playing around with quantum mechanics, maybe, and saying, what would the human mind, how would the human mind, and I just brought up his theology, maybe a little bit of one of the reasons Revelations is so debated is because what is John actually seeing, and what is this barely out of the Bronze Age individual, how is he going to make sense of this if what he is seeing is something in the far future? I mean, how would he interpret that? How would someone from 60 AD, what the heck would he think if he saw an attack helicopter? What the heck is that?
Dragon.
Yeah, is what the heck is Rand actually seeing? Well, this is how his brain is interpreting it, but what he's really seeing, you can let your own imagination run a little wild. What jumped out at you? I'm sure you have thoughts here.
No, I think I'm going to save some of those for the
When it gets more in depth later.
when it gets more in depth later.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, it is what you said. You get a little bit that some earlier thoughts on Morden is exactly what the Dark One was thinking. That
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he didn't someone have a thought that uh the Dark One utilizes me to my maximum potential or something? I know
That
he
was one
doesn't
of the
care.
things Slayer said when he was talking to
Yes,
Perrin
yes,
is,
yes, yeah.
yeah, people discard tools. The Dark One doesn't discard a tool. He might punish you if you fail, but he doesn't discard you if you're a useful tool.
And you get that repeated here from the Dark One's own thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Um, then we switch back to Perrin, and I didn't have much on this, but then I kind of thought about it, and I was like, what do we make of the fact that Perrin seems confused here and seems almost tempted and is kind of begging Lanfear for help? Is this just him kind of falling apart because he's been in the world of dreams in the flesh too long?
I mean, he's also got an arrow through his chest, but
I mean,
that's
there's that.
yeah.
But I mean, the thing I do like is that Fail, a piece of his mind said, don't worry about Lanfear. You have to go to Fail. Is that in much the same way that some of the generals, especially Iturralde, were able to resist whatever Greandal is doing to them, if this is something Lanfear is doing to him. But it doesn't seem like it's something Lanfear is doing because she rejects him. She doesn't help him.
Yeah,
So
she's a jaded
yeah. So
yeah, she's just a jaded ex-lover, even though they weren't lovers, it's
it
just
seems like something is messing with Perrin's mind here, but I don't think it's Lanfear. So
I think
maybe this is
I think it has to do with being wounded in the world of dreams, in the
in the
flesh.
flesh.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So all of those three things combined, because your soul is well, no, wait, because Lanfear says earlier in this book that the Ashaman that die in the flesh there will still have their souls. It's not like the wolf dying.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a good point.
But because he's also a wolf dreamer, is it different for him? That's a question.
Good point. All right, then again, it switches back to Fail, which I like the pairing here of, you know, think of Fail, get back to her, and then we get back to her and it's, oh boy, is she screwed. Um, but in there sitting down and trying to figure out what happened and what to do, one of them, I think it may be Mandavin, somebody says, surely the shadow has greater things to misdirect than a simple supply train. And of course, this is from Fail's point of view, and she's trying not to look at her tent, which has the chest that has the horn in it. And I wondered because see, something we do see with the thing that is kind of breaking Rand's brain, and the reason he has to anchor himself as he thinks about it is because he's able to see the pattern. He exists out of time, which means he sees past, present, and future all at once. Which, holy crap, what would that do to the human brain?
Mm-hmm.
We are temporal creatures. So, what
We're
happens
worse than
when you
temporal
break that?
creatures. We're about 300ths of a second behind real life. So
Yeah. So, how does that break your brain? Well, if Rand can see it, then can the Dark One. So, does the Dark One know that the horn is there? Or is the horn such a big effing deal that it naturally draws a bubble because it is like a Oh, what are the hippie deep the ley lines? Is that
Mhm.
the ley lines? And then they're like focus points where ley lines cross. I can't remember what they're called, but that's what I think of when I think of something like the horn. That's got to be like one of those points in the pattern, right? Because we know that certain moments, as well as certain people, sometimes Tavarin warp the pattern around them, or not warp, but draw the pattern around it. The pattern revolves around this thing or this moment. So is that so strong that it just naturally drew a bubble of evil to it?
Well, wouldn't it have done that just in the storage room then?
I wouldn't think so, because that's potential energy, and this is now kinetic energy because it's being taken to.
Hmm.
It's being activated, or it's on its way to being activated. It's being, it's something is happening to it. Anywho, then where
She's
does it switch to?
well, as Fael, she
Oh,
gets suspicious of Satel Anon, which
yep.
we all know things, but and that's the thing, when you hold secrets, you lead yourself to being suspected of
Hmm.
things. And
It's a good point.
yeah.
Yeah, and so even though we know she's more or less above suspicion, Fael has no way of knowing this,
Hmm.
and
And this is where
because
the
what's
mixing
going
of
on.
characters has been good because
Mhm.
we've got
Mm,
her through Matt's storyline for
that's a good
forever.
point.
And you develop that bond through Matt's storyline. But now we've got her in a new storyline that's, I guess, connected more to Perrin because of Fael. But Fael doesn't know her from Adam, right?
Yeah, yeah.
She's trusting that somebody trusted her in the past. She makes the comments in her head about Harnan.
Well, yeah,
Talmany's,
Satal, the Red Arms. It's
yeah.
she. Perrin, my husband trusts Matt, and Matt trusts these people. So transitive property, but I don't really know these people, and something terrible just happened. So, oh crap, you know. Yeah. Um. Then we switch to back
Avienda
to
again.
Avienda,
Yeah.
and again, this is some of Sanderson's best writing, not just from a character point of view, but because you know this is why these awful shows that I referenced, one of the big reasons they're so awful is because they're using existing IPs to push their own ideas and agendas, not to tell a story about these characters. And these characters already exist. We already know who She-Hulk is. We already know who Galadriel is. You know, here with this terrible show, we already know who Rand, Matt, and Perrin are, and that's not them. What I'm seeing on the screen, every once in a while, there was a glimpse of the real Matt. He was probably the closest, or at least had moments, and the others, not really, you know. But
No, Rand
because he,
Rand had good moments. I just say that his good moments depended on who he was on the screen with.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Um, but because Sanderson seems to get Avienda and is able to write her so well, that means what he writes lands, it has an impact. So, for instance, here on this first page of this Avienda section, Saren, who is, I believe, a white and is one of the ones that was with Cadsuin, and that's why she's with Avienda here, is um so we and again, back to the point you made, he when we left her, they were running into a battle, and it was going to be a big and an ugly one. And he references that they fought all that night and into the day and then into the next night, that they have been going at it, and we don't need to see it. He lets us feel it through Avienda's worry, her concern, the fact that they're starting to wear down and all this. And then we switch to the aftermath, which is her investigating one of these Red Veil bodies. And I think I knew him, she says. And she goes on to, he was nice to me. And then, you know, the first time he channeled was when he made Algo to grow when it should not. I'm sorry, Saren said, though her voice was uncolored by any sympathy. Avienda was growing accustomed to that in the woman. It wasn't that Saren didn't care, she just didn't let caring distract her. At least, not when her warder was elsewhere. The Aes Sedai would have made a fine maiden. That's a big effing statement coming from Avienda.
Mm-hmm.
That shows a ton of personal growth. That she would look at this wetlander and one, not only get her, not only understand her, not only not hold her personality quirks against her, but think you would make a good, not just good Aiel, but good maiden. That is high praise coming from her. Um, and so what happens in a couple of pages, this setup makes the end of this scene and the end of this chapter a heck of a gut punch when you see Greandal come out of nowhere, clearly having anticipated, been this is clearly a planned ambush because Aviendha has fought her a couple of times. And so now she comes in behind her, kills the women that were in her circle, except for Saren, who we have just had this great personal moment with them. And now Greandal just turns her into a puppet and then
Mm-hmm.
vanishes with her. It's like, oh, that is cruel, but it it lands so hard because of this setup.
Well, we got another fan favorite, Dammer Flynn, who lost his
Yeah,
arm. There's
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Good old Demmer. Yeah, yeah. That's at least he's not dead. But holy crap, wasn't he also the one that had the limp? He was already,
Yeah, he was
yeah,
already,
because
yeah.
he was the old Andoran guardsman who
Mm-hmm.
took a lance in the thigh, and so he had a limp, and now he doesn't have an arm, and just, oh, you poor dude. At least he's still alive.
Yeah, hopefully
Yikes.
that leg holds out because you won't be able to use crutches, you know.
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding. Well, that is where we are going to stop for today. Do you have any
Uh,
closing
I
thoughts on these
just hope it
chapters?
wasn't his winking ham.
He has a girl now. He has the yellow. She
Oh,
can she can make him she can play nurse for him.
as we digress. At least we ended on a laugh with people losing their arms, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
dark humor is the best humor because the world is dark and this is a dark time. It's oh geez, I didn't mean that to be in reality. I was referring to the book. But yeah, it's you know, things are getting bad, getting worse before they get better. I kind of like it and think that maybe it has to be on purpose that the real confrontation, because that was something Rand said there in that scene, is that I should have known. Moradin thought it was going to be some showdown, some sword fight between the two of us, and actually, there's a callback, a reference to Demandred's rantings and ravings. There could have been a stronger thread tying those two ideas together. Because now that I say it out loud, I think maybe that's supposed to be connected. But again, we should have seen Demandred going crazy. But anyway, um, but Rand makes the point now the real confrontation can begin. And so now that the real last battle is beginning, it makes sense. It's kind of appropriate that humanity is being thrown down and is at its lowest, right? It's the fourth quarter. Now the fourth quarter, the real game has begun, and you're trailing by multiple scores. Oh boy, what are we gonna do?
hopefully it doesn't end up like Baltimore Dallas, huh?
Well, that's why culture matters. Because who's in charge? Who's in charge now? That you need a fourth quarter comeback. All right. Well, you want John Elway. Why? Because he had the right stuff. Matt grew up in the Two Rivers. Matt has this mentality that will let him navigate what's going on here, that will let him. Matt is chaos, and what is the dark? The dark is entropy. Matt knows how to act and react because that's his. You're playing on his field.
So you're
You
saying it's a
think you have the
fight
home field
fire with
advantage.
fire
Yeah,
situation.
it's a
Yeah.
fight fire with fire situation. So it makes sense that now here at the last hour of the last battle, this is the one who has to be in charge.
Hmm. Well, and then I guess I just made this note when Rand stepped into that darkness and he sees the weaves around him. My first thought was he's gone plaid. He's gone plaid.
Uh, hey, if that's what helps you navigate, is
Yeah, yeah.
I navigate the nonsense of this world with blazing saddles. Hey, where are the white women at?
Uh,
All right.
we'll do it
Well,
again. We went long this time. It's like at least 2 hours.
I didn't have a ton of notes, but we opened up some interesting boxes there, and which considering how rough it was getting through the reading through those first two chapters because of all the Egwene, I was kind of groaning and grumbling to myself last night. But you know, it turned out pretty well, and there were some interesting thoughts there.
All right. Well, we'll get this
Hopefully, we
up
have
as
some
soon as.
interesting thoughts next time on our social episode. Who the heck knows what that's even going to be?
Yeah, I wanted to talk more about the disconnect between not only females and males, but academic females and
Mhm.
what masculinity actually means and why it's actually important.
All
And
right. Well, I got some disturbing numbers I can bring up for that, so we'll play
oh,
around with that.
like the number of domestic assaults is actually greater for women against their husbands than the other way around. It's I don't think this is a women are meaner or more aggressive thing. I think it's just you're gonna do it more if you can get away with it.
Hmm.
That it's as simple as that. There's no malice to it. Just when there's no repercussion, you're going to do more of the act.
You know what? We'll bring up something that you sent me that I've been wanting to talk about, which is that podcast that your friend Jared was on, talking
Mm.
about relationships and are all athletes cheaters, I think was the title of it. So there, I have a connection to that we can make. All right. Well, we will see y'all then.
All right, later, guys.